Philadelphia Phillies, Texas Rangers. One of these two teams will very likely be the 2023 World Series champion, but who needs the title more? I'm about to discuss who I believe needs the ring more this year and why. So the Phillies last won a World Series championship back in 2008. The Texas Rangers have never won a World Series. Despite this, I say the Philadelphia Phillies need it more than the Rangers do here in 2023. So these teams have absolutely owned the postseason in their respective leagues. They're a combined 14-1. The Rangers, of course, unbeaten going into tonight's Game 3 against the Astros, 7-0. The Phillies 7-1 in the playoffs, despite having to go through the best team in baseball this season, the Atlanta Braves. Both of these teams, the Phillies and the Rangers, they're here to stay. Both will be good, probably throughout the majority of these 2020s. However, it's not just going to be a cakewalk back to the postseason, both play in very competitive divisions. The Rangers will keep having to go through the Astros and the Mariners. The Philadelphia Phillies will, of course, have to deal with the Braves. You have Spendin' Steve Cohen over there with the Mets. I can't see them being out of contention for long. And Miami somehow made the playoffs. So the reason I say the Phillies need it more than the Rangers is because this is year 2 for the Philadelphia Phillies of making a deep October run. 2 straight years we've gone to October and the vibes have been at an all-time high. It's back. Red October is happening once again. This is the greatest possible sequel to Red October that Phillies fans could have possibly asked for. Red October last year was so special, out of nowhere, a stunning World Series run. This year, it's not as stunning because we already witnessed them do it before, so we knew they had it in them because this team is even a little better than the one that made the deep run last year. They have Trey Turner on the team this time around. Not to mention Bohm and Stott are better players this year than they were last year. Bullpen also improved in 2023. But the bottom line is this is the second time that the Phillies are going through the postseason, and it would just be crushing if these elite on top of the world vibes ended in devastation by losing the World Series for a second straight year. Because ultimately they already made the World Series. They know they could make the World Series. And last year, the vibes going into the offseason, going into the season, were still incredibly high just because of the fact that they made it to the World Series. Because despite losing the series to the Astros, it was an incredible run. It was further than they could have imagined. But this year, they're in it to win it. You don't want to just go back to the World Series. Obviously, that's amazing, okay? It's amazing in itself to make 2 straight World Series. It's not like we expected them to make the World Series again going into this postseason, but ultimately they're in it to win it this time. At this point, it would be a disappointing situation. Things are so good that it would be a disappointing situation if they ended up going to the World Series and losing it, because let's be real, they're going to the World Series. They're up 2-0 on the Diamondbacks. We'll have to have a discussion in the offseason about if Arizona was the worst team to ever make the LCS. But the Phillies do not want to lose the World Series again, and not that Texas wants to lose if they make it. But here's the deal. Philly, the vibes heading into the offseason for Philly would be not great if they lost 2 straight World Series. You'll start seeing comment sections flooded with all that just to lose in the World Series. Meanwhile, for Texas, if they lose in the World Series, they still have those very positive offseason vibes that Philly got to experience last year. Because going into 2023, the Texas Rangers obviously had done nothing yet with this core, and they were projected by most to go below 500. I will say this, guys. In the last offseason, I made a YouTube video, or a TikTok actually, Centerfield Media, talking about my 3 sleeper teams for the 2023 season, my 3 most underrated teams. The Rangers were on there. People were sleeping on them. I saw it. Didn't see this, but you would be out of your mind to say you thought they were going to the World Series. Shout out to my friend, though. You know who you are if you're watching this. You said in April that the Texas Rangers are winning 90 games. Now, the Rangers were off to a great start at that point, but it was April. The season is a baby in April. It had barely started. I also had the Cubs on my 3 most underrated teams. People saw them being genuinely pretty bad this year. They were above 500, and ultimately they had a way better lineup than Milwaukee, but they didn't have the pitching. They didn't have the experience or anything like that they had a bunch of veteran players on the Chicago team, but they were new as a core, and I think the Cubs will be here in 2024, possibly overtaking the Brewers. They just couldn't quite do that this year, but I think they were a more talented team than Milwaukee was. And my other sleeper team going into the season was the San Diego Padres. That went terrible. I had the Padres being the best team in baseball this year. I think the Padres are going to be good next year. I made my early 2024 power rankings, which I'll put up on Instagram at Centerfield Media soon. I have the Padres coming in at number 7 going into next season. I think they'll be back. I think they're a way better team than their record suggested this year, obviously. But my point is that if you're a Texas Rangers fan, even in your best of dreams, you couldn't genuinely envision this team being World Series champions going into the season. Like, it was almost just kind of one of those things that you say as a joke, Rangers World Champions. And now we're looking at a world where it can very well happen. Whereas for Philly, if you said it before the season, it was absolutely a realistic thing to think about the Phillies winning the World Series, considering they were in the World Series last year. So both of these teams will be here for years to come. It's still pretty early in the era of both of these teams, I want to say, even for Philly. But the vibes would become more sour for Philly if they lose in the World Series than they would for Texas moving forward with these cores. So therefore, the Philadelphia Phillies need it more than the Texas Rangers, despite the Phillies franchise already having a ring and the Rangers not. Because the Texas Rangers have already clinched an overwhelmingly successful season by getting to the ALCS and probably the World Series, whereas the Philadelphia Phillies ultimately, like, yeah, it's been a successful season, of course, it's been great. However, their goal for this season was to win the World Series, because you got to take that next step. That's your goal as a team, is always going to be the next step. They made the World Series last year, so ultimately you've done everything but win the World Series, so that's what you need to do this year. Phillies need it more than Texas. Thank you all so much for watching. Follow me on TikTok and Instagram. So much content on those two platforms. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell here on YouTube. I would appreciate it. Thumbs up as well. Yeah, man, hit that bell so you don't miss anything, because we have a plethora of great off-season content coming up here on Center Field Media, so you don't want to miss any of that stuff.